thanks to RPGX for sponsoring this video. The horror genre is no stranger to the concept of a haunted house. These houses can be set in reality, a paranormal otherworld, or even in space. And the haunting can derive from the unrest of a begrudging ghost, or perhaps the malicious entity is the building itself. But there's a less popular interpretation of haunted houses that are explored in video games as more than just a backdrop. And that's the literal haunted theme park attraction kind. You know, like the ones you might find at a fairground that receive a lot more visitors around Halloween for those seasonal events, and tend to feature dark corridors with actors leaping out at you. Speaking of the dimly lit hallways of horror titles, you may find yourself in the presence of a relentless stalker and desperately searching for a nearby locker to hide in. Now imagine unwanted ads following you as you're browsing online. But instead of having to hold your breath in hiding, you can browse freely and without worry with today's sponsor, RPGX, with their ad blocker feature. There's also a built-in VPN that lets you vanish into the shadows and protect your privacy from malicious entities. Though there is one instance where darkness is comforting instead, and that's thanks to the Force Dark Mode option, which shields your eyes from offensively bright web pages. The curation of your browser experience doesn't stop there, as you can customize the appearance of RPGX by downloading mods from the GX store or even by creating your own. You're able to mix and match different elements of mods if you're like me and can't choose between all of the amazing options, which add static or animated wallpapers that react to your actions in the browser, or even alternative light versions if you prefer. Mods also include background music, shaders, custom splash screens, fonts and icons, as well as sound effects for typing and tab interactions, giving you control over your browser like it's your own inventory. And the video pop-out function is incredibly useful too. Making the switch to RPGX and breaking free from the constraints of basic browsers couldn't be easier thanks to the Quick Import tool. And you can quickly import all your settings from your previous browser like bookmarks, cookies, and browsing history. Plus it's compatible with every Google Chrome extension. I've been using RPGX for years at this point and haven't looked back. So join me and use my link below to download the best browser around. Amusement parks in general can be found in many a virtual world, which do sometimes include a haunted mansion of sorts to engage with. But in my experience, it often just serves as a cool environmental change with little to no gameplay alterations, save for maybe less combat and more sightseeing and jump scares. Still, these segments tend to end up being pretty memorable parts of their respective games. I was always curious to see what it would be like if a title was truly committed to translating this type of haunted house experience as accurately as possible into video game form. Thankfully, my recent delve into the Dreamcast exclusive library would answer my call with Illbleed, which would not only make me realise it's the perfect theme park style haunted house game, but also the most mechanically unique survival horror game I've ever played. Developed by Crazy Games and released in 2001 for the Dreamcast, Illbleed would be the studio's second title after Blue Stinger, which was also a console exclusive. Both share a similar art style, as well as things like certain recovery items, models, and a handful of references to their previous game in Illbleed. However, the developers would start fresh with a new setting and story, moving slightly away from the sci-fi movie inspirations of Spielberg and Joe Dante and venturing even further into the horror realm. The game begins with protagonist Eriko Christie giving a speech at a school competition, in which she explains how she grew up with parents who ran a horror caravan. During her childhood, they travelled around supplying scares to numerous towns, but her dad would first test his tricks out on her, essentially scarring her for life. After a while, he became obsessed with setting up traps and feeding off of the fear of others, so Eriko's mum divorced him. And after all the years of being a test pilot for scares, Eriko admits she's been made considerably braver from the exposure to all things terrifying, and even has a certain attachment to horror as a result.
I think I might major in child psychology.
After her speech, Eriko's friends Kevin and Randy praise her performance before their other friend Michelle runs up to them and shows off 4 tickets to something called Illbleed, each adorned with their names. Illbleed is a theme park created by a famous horror movie producer called Michael Reynolds, and boasts a prize of $100 million to anyone who can get through the entire park. The group all seem elated at the prospect of all that cash, and are eager to jump headfirst into the experience, which Michelle says is probably just filled with cheesy props and scares anyway. Eriko rightfully isn't convinced by all this, suspicious of the park's ability to afford such a silly-sounding amount of money, and refuses to go. But that doesn't deter the other three airheads, and they skedaddle off to the famed Horrorland. Much to no one's surprise, the trio of buffoons end up missing, and Eriko visits Illbleed a few days later in search of her idiotic friend group. She doesn't have much luck asking about them at reception, and so has no choice but to enter the horror experience herself to find them. You're immediately given control on entering the main park, giving you free rein to explore this cozy hub world section before entering any of the levels. These can be accessed via the cinema zone, with each of the 6 theatre buildings reproducing a film directed by Michael Reynolds as an interactable haunted house experience. In preparation for these, you can head over to a tutorial graveyard with signs written by Mr. Reynolds himself, which, in addition to the numerous facilities available in the theme park, shows that he does put an effort to be a good host to his guests. Though I guess that doesn't really matter all that much, because not a single person has ever survived all of the stages of Illbleed, which is quite literally a homicidal theme park for anyone who dares take on its challenge in pursuit of fat stacks of cash. This business setup means that Reynolds makes his money each time a guest perishes. But who am I to judge an entrepreneurial evil mastermind that, according to the official website, laughs his way to the bank? Still, you are given a pretty fair chance of winning through the various services Illbleed provides, and you have access to them at the end of every level. Within the absurd architectural designs featured through the hub's buildings, you can make use of anything you'd possibly need. In the emergency room, for example, you can go under the knife and receive operations for recovery, stat enhancements, and later on resuscitations if you unlock the ability to play as your friends by saving them in their respective levels. If you failed at rescuing them by the end of a stage, you can opt to buy them back at the hotel-inspired lobby of the visitor bank, though for a hefty price. At the back of the fully stocked aisles of Bloody Mary's drugstore, you can purchase healing items like IV drips, plasters, and steak dinners. And you're able to save your game by interacting with the camera at the Dummy Man photo studio. There'll even be locations within the stages you play where you'll see a photo booth or a set of doors leading to an ER section, so you can take advantage of these 2 amenities mid-level as well. If you think about it, these structures can be seen as interpretations of things you'd find in any normal theme park. You have the entertainment and attractions, food stands, photo opportunities, accommodation, and hopefully some kind of first aid available. Illbleed takes these aspects and shapes them to fit the context of its gameplay mechanics, as well as the horror comedy flavour of its world. Whether you're in the main hub or in the midst of a stage, you'll come across environments that are sickeningly vibrant in a way that feels quite endearing. And there are plenty of details like funny signs and fake products that add to that charming and campy tackiness. Some areas feel almost liminal as a result of their large scale and emptiness. And combined with the music track, the emergency room in particular adopts an incredibly comforting quality. I very quickly fell in love with the bizarre visual style of Illbleed. But what was even more ludicrous was the storylines and events of the haunted houses you visit. Each stage begins with the setting being introduced by a narrator before the title drop for the movie. The first of these self-contained stories involves quelling the anger of an innkeeper called Mr. Banbellow, who lost his son in a fire while they were playing baseball in the basement. In the short but sweet second level, you enter a tale about a worm farm business owner whose ghost begs you to kill his daughter Rachel. Turns out she's actually a giant worm that you have to destroy with fire, and in doing so you reunite her spirit with her father.
At last, we can be together forever. Let's go back to hell.
The next story takes you to a mysterious sawmill once owned by a guy called George McLachlan, who tested out a chainsaw he made on an ancient tree which suddenly grew a face and ate him alive. But as the narrator mentions,
no one cared because he was a loner anyway.
Several years later, the sawmill workers and visitors are being turned into wood puppets. And at the end, you must defeat a malfunctioning George McLachlan tree animatronic that pulls a weirdly contorted face as if he died from watching a certain cursed tape 7 days ago. With that, you can now access the killer department store owned by Donald Cashman, a money-obsessed madman who murdered all the customers he enticed with a $1 million cashback sale. It's up to you to run through the aisles of the different departments and reach the vault where he lies in waiting. And the 5th stage revolves around a murder mystery dedicated to discovering the true identity of the killer man who has been terrorizing a facility, with most of the level consisting of navigating a maze of walkways over the theme park's expansive morgue, before finally facing off against the notorious serial killer and escaping. While a lot of these plotlines have been pretty wacky, the most unhinged movie is saved for last. This cast rendition of Toy Story puts us into the shoes of the cowboy Cork, who comes back home from his adventures to rejoin his fellow toys as well as his owner Henry. We're introduced to Cork's romantic partner called Sexy Doll, and I'm going to have to censor this for YouTube, but let's just say I think Illbleed's on-site ER also offers BBLs. Our meeting with her is cut short though, because Henry dies and she's thrown into the coffin with him. This leaves Cork devastated, and he wanders towards the graveyard where he witnesses Sexy Doll's spirit get swept away by a monstrous Sonic the Hedgehog that goes by the name of Zodic the Hellhog. Anyway, Cork helplessly moves forward to a nearby town, and is arrested after he kills a bunch of eggs because they tease him for being a useless coward. Luckily though, he finds his clearly Buzz Lightyear-inspired buddy in one of the prison cells, and together they try to reach Toy Hell to save Sexy Doll. The means of getting there involves Cork finding a new owner, and then straight up killing them so he could get buried alongside them, transporting him to the entrance of Zodic's battle arena. Using the rings he drops, you're able to overcome the deranged Sega mascot, and the story ends with the trio flying off into the fiery skies of hell. I know the distinct storylines for each stage sound too outlandish to be real, but I promise I'm not exaggerating any of this. These levels share several mechanics that are rather unconventional and took me a bit of getting used to. But once I jumped into the first movie and took some time to understand how everything worked, it wasn't anywhere near as complex as the initially overwhelming UI made it out to be. At the beginning of every stage, your top priority is going to be locating something called a horror monitor, which you can find by looking around until the 4 sensors at the top of the screen go berserk, indicating your close proximity to it. With this tool, you're able to protect yourself from shock events, which are basically traps and enemies that are activated if you're nearby. These can include the most ridiculous moments like getting attacked by a burger or being subjected to green stink clouds leaking into view, making you question the safety of every step you take. But thanks to the horror monitor, you can leave warning marks on certain areas or objects that you're suspicious of, and it will avoid setting off the trap if there actually is one there.
Cool.
Placing these marks uses up your limited adrenaline resource, so you can't just spam them across your environments and have to think carefully about where these shock events could originate from. This plays into enemy encounters too, as your prediction of their location affects your entrance into the fight. If you don't place a warning marker, you'll get scared and fall to the floor at the start of the battle, leaving you scrambling to get back up and more susceptible to taking a hit. In contrast, if you do place a marker, you'll have a chance to attack first and get the upper hand. Beating enemies and correctly predicting traps replenishes some of your adrenaline, and you'll get help from your different senses that will alert you to its approximate location. Sight, hearing, and smell can tell you how far you are from danger, but the 6th sense is reserved only for the indication of enemies or items. The way traps are generated isn't identical each time you play through an area, so memorizing a route through a level isn't going to be as helpful as you might think. A retry of almost all the levels can follow one of 3 patterns, that each bring about their own guaranteed shock events and placements. Plus, there are a significant number of unavoidable scares in any given pattern anyway, so it wouldn't be worth your time to learn these unless you're speedrunning. Combat is another big part of the game given its mandatory boss fights and frequency of smaller battles spawned in by shock events. It's pretty much what you'd expect from survival horror combats, apart from maybe the very dramatic reactions to being hit, or the infinite ammo for the albeit rare instances you get a firearm. And you can actually flee from fights against common enemies by mashing the B button when near the helipad symbol, and grab onto the ladder once in reach. But doing so normally takes long enough for an enemy to interrupt your cry for help, so literal fight or flight. Instead of just a health bar, Illbleed has physical strength, pulse rates, and bleeding, all of which you'll need to keep an eye on. Your pulse will increase if you trigger a shock event or dodge while in combat, and if it's too high, your character will faint and you'll be vulnerable to attacks. But if you stand still long enough, it slowly calms your heartbeat back to normal. The bleed rate increases when damaged by an opponent or trap, and over a certain level will continuously reduce your health until bleeding is under control. The player will die when bleeding reaches 100 or when physical health falls to 0. The emergency room offers recovery procedures for these stats, as well as permanent upgrades for them if you've collected enough relevant upgrade materials. The main structure of Illbleed is going into a stage, completing it, and winning some prize money, then spending some time in the hub buying upgrades and resources in preparation for the next. The amount of money won from finishing a level has a maximum amount given only if certain conditions are met. Otherwise, some of it is deducted. These requirements are based on the number of traps cleared, the time it took to beat the stage, and finishing with optimal enough pulse, bleed, and health points. Within that framework, each stage presents you with unique gameplay aspects to contend with. For instance, Eriko is turned into a wood puppet in the 4th movie, and you cannot jump as a result, but you are given a new moveset for combat for dealing with the woodcutters you're up against. When it comes to finding the Killer Man, you have to choose who you think could be under the mask, Scooby-Doo style, which gives you bonus money if you make the right choice, with the answer being very, very obscure. The department store introduces some unexpected features like traps that steal your money and the requirement to have a specific amount of cash in order to proceed to the next floor. There's also a grocery section with a meat aisle, which I foolishly took as a chance to steal a bunch of pork to eat, realizing my mistake when they were then turned into enemies I had to fight. As an additional change of structure in this stage, you must pass a series of trials given to you by an evil doll called Cutie Marie, whose name spelling doesn't quite make sense, but that's okay. The different games include hide and seek and jump rope, the latter of which took me more attempts than I care to admit, but the animation of getting hits did make me chuckle. Apart from playing as Cork in the Toy Hunter stage and conveniently being in possession of a gun, you'll also get optional cutscenes that you'll want to watch for the full story. But leaving a warning mark on the spots where these are triggered means that you won't be able to watch it, so you're having to hold back from treating everything as a possible threat like you normally would up until this point. Illbleed doesn't really do subtlety. You're constantly bombarded with reminders that you're in an amusement park built specifically to scare and likely kill you. You're often able to peek behind the curtain, so to speak, with many of the gargantuan final bosses quickly revealed to be animatronics, which are controlled by workers and have the possibility of malfunctioning. Some of them are even defeated by making your way to their respective control rooms and stealing their remote controls or simply turning them off. The Killer Man level especially provides some insight into the inner workings of Illbleed from an operational perspective, with their vast storage of props and even a visit to the morgue to see where all the dead contestants go. In a Dreamcast interview, game director Shinya Nishigaki describes the genre of Illbleed as a virtual horror land, explaining that the sheer size of the stages and length of a playthrough turns the experience into what is basically the world's longest haunted house. Wanting to have a much more horror-focused game than their last title, Blue Stinger, the development team spent a lot of time figuring out exactly what direction they should go in. They sought to bring something new to the genre, and so they researched human psychology, watched a lot of horror movies, and went to scare attractions in an effort to immerse themselves fully into their target experience. One of these was the super scary Labyrinth of Fear at Fuji-Q Highland Amusement Park, which the team visited after wondering what a haunted house that took 45 minutes to get through would be like. According to Nishigaki, it was in fact, as its name suggested, super scary. And that excursion would give them the idea to create a haunted house incorporating all the tricks of the 80s horror movie trade, one that could be experienced through a game. While other games possess elements of this concept, Illbleed would be wholly dedicated to the theme and be set within the ultimate haunted house that's so elaborate that it cost 55 billion yen to build. It's something that would only ever exist in fiction, and its premise being one where almost every guest dies also sets it apart from real scare attractions. In that way, it subverts a core aspect of them being a safe, controlled space to encounter fear, as any visitor knows that they simply involve practical effects, dark rooms, and underpaid actors. But regardless of the lack of any real physical danger, you can still find yourself looking at the floor and hiding behind a friend to avoid contact with the equivalent of shock events. Knowing when and where something is going to pop out at you reduces its shock factor, and even though it's somewhat of a shame that this feature circumvents the cutscenes of these silly traps, it's far more accurate to the approach a scared visitor would have when going through a real haunted house experience. But then again, this also makes sense given that the traps can quite literally kill you. Nishigaki also adds to this by explaining that with their research and reference to existing haunted house attractions, they found that you can also make out enough of your surroundings in their dark corridors to spot places that look suspicious, and ready yourself for something to jump out at you when you get closer to it. When something does happen, you get the satisfaction of knowing something was there, and if nothing happens, you feel a wave of relief. And it's that relationship with anticipation that was the foundation of the gameplay. Walking through one of these attractions in real life and feeling your heart rate increase from fear and your adrenaline focus your senses is an experience that the developers try to translate directly into game mechanics, and I believe they succeeded. In an article by psychologist Frank T. McAndrew, he says that haunted houses give us the creeps not because they pose a clear threat to us, but rather because it is unclear whether or not they represent a threat. For example, it would be considered bizarre and embarrassing to run screaming out of a house that makes you feel uneasy if there is actually nothing to fear. On the other hand, it could be perilous to ignore your intuition and remain in a place that is dangerous. Instead of the embarrassment, Illbleed substitutes this with a deduction of adrenaline, which is arguably more important for surviving the deadly stages than actual weapons. Another side of scare attractions is their innate social aspect, being a chance to spend time with friends and family. And so long as you've saved your friends in their respective stages, you'll be able to play as them from there on out should you choose to. Sadly, you don't play as a group running around the levels, but you do switch out to another available character if you die, kinda like a relay race in a haunted house. There were even mechanics that didn't end up in the game that involved blood types and life insurance, and they make an appearance in unused user interface elements. A prototype of Illbleed actually still has the Hell's Insurance building in the hub, but this was ultimately replaced by the Visitor Bank in the final version. Either way, the development team's passion and unwavering commitment to building their virtual horrorland is obvious. And as it stands, I truly believe it's the most mechanically imaginative survival horror title ever. Illbleed isn't heavily influenced only by haunted houses, it's a love letter to campy horror films too. From the premise of a film director making a theme park based on his features, to the silly movie names like The Home Run of Death and The Revenge of the Queen Worm, the 80s horror inspiration mentioned in an interview is impossible to miss. It felt like a continuation of Crazy Games style shown in Blue Stinger, and Nishigaki highlights that this last title involved dressing up as Santa, for example, carrying on this tradition of what he calls a parade of utter mixed-up nonsense in Illbleed. The strategy guide notes a couple influences for various aspects of the game, saying that Mr. Bambello came from the film The Burning, referring to the murderer's name that was used in the Japanese marketing and who also suffered from severe burns due to a cruel prank. The giant earthworms could also have been born from tremors, as you're required to carefully jump over cars to avoid making vibrations that alert the underground fiends to your location. And while it's not a horror film, Bloody Mary is said to be based on vintage mentholatum nurse dolls that were popular in Japan, serving as nostalgia to players who saw the TV advertisements back in the day. There are even a couple pages in the guide that are dedicated to the dev team listing out their horror movie recommendations too, illustrating their clear adoration for the genre and their effort to ensure Illbleed reflected that. I can't even begin to describe how many times this game had me in tears. It is genuinely and effortlessly the funniest thing I've played. The narrator absolutely killed me every time with his lines and awkward timing, and the sheer absurdity of pretty much every story beat was hilarious. There's a moment where you give a cake a decapitated head it requested for its decoration, and out of gratitude lets you take them with you to nibble away at as a healing item.
Complete at last!
I'm not even kidding when I say that tonally. This is like if Bobobo was made into a horror game, and since I loved that series when I was younger, it's no wonder I really took to Illbleed's atmosphere. After you save all of your friends and beat the final boss in Reynolds Museum building on your first playthrough, you'll have beaten Illbleed and receive your prize.
And here, for the fanfare, is the Michael Reynolds Orchestra. I'm a man of my word. Here, I present you $100 million.
There'll be a post-credit scene where you see Eriko and her idiot friends chilling at a beach and discussing how to spend all their prize money. Eriko sits quietly for a bit before she finally says that she's going to go back to Illbleed alone this time.
Thanks a lot, guys. I love you all.
This brings you to New Game Plus, but to get the outlandish new ending, you have to get through the entire game once more without rescuing anyone, waiting for enough time to pass or ignoring the areas they're located in altogether. As you play, Eriko's clothes slowly deteriorate, leaving her stark naked by the time she reaches Reynolds Museum again. And it amazes me how it's not just the third birthday that has this very specific mechanic. Anyway, when you enter the final arena, Michael Reynolds reacts to Eriko's lack of clothing like a creep. And if that wasn't bad enough, he runs out and our protagonist realizes that's her dad.
Dad!
Yeah. Eriko explains she came back to Illbleed because she wants her sense of fear returned, to which her dad responds that he prepared a little gift for her to celebrate their reunion. This consists of 3 shock events, whereby you have to use a special horror monitor to find 3 items from Eriko's childhood. After clearing this trial, Reynolds begins to freak out, and Eriko pulls an epic prank on him that sends him spiraling into cardiac arrest, apparently. He then melts away and transforms into a giant creepy head, prompting a boss fight. He also has a second stage and morphs into some kind of Lovecraftian nightmare. But once destroyed, Eriko looks down upon him and admits that he finally managed to frighten her. After this, we get one final and unfortunate scene after the credits.
The new president of the Horror Research Club will now be me, Kevin Kurtzman, due to the fact that our old president Eriko is just not the same anymore. Poor Eriko. Once fearless and strong, she turned into a vulnerable little girl who needs a fearless knight in shining armor to protect her. Like me. Yeah. And the sad part is, I can't go to the horror house with her anymore.
You know how I feel about Eriko's buddies, so you can probably tell I hate this ending. But I suppose she got her wish in wanting to feel fear again. And with that, my time with Illbleed came to an end. Overall, the passion of the developers for their campy virtual horrorland is clear. It subverts the haunted house scare attraction concept by using actual danger, and is able to be as elaborate and ridiculous as it likes. While the mechanics require some effort to learn, clicking with the game's logic didn't take that long for me, and seeing how committed the developers were to translating the real-life experience into gameplay makes me appreciate it even more. Illbleed provides enough variation in its stages by introducing new elements often, and I could have never predicted the pure craziness I'd witness. Even at the 2000 Tokyo Game Show campaign booth for Illbleed, they set up a competition where 5 participants were able to try their hand at completing the demo within an allotted time frame. Unlike the whopping reward in-game, winners would receive a more realistic prize money amount of 100,000 yen, and losers would still get an original Illbleed t-shirt and a pamphlet. I have so much respect for the dev team who were completely unafraid of pouring all this love into something so unabashedly wild and unconventional, wholeheartedly creating the perfect haunted house game. A big thank you to my patrons, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see any of my future work, you're welcome to subscribe and stay notified. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.